Welcome back to The Conscious Entrepreneur. Today, I'm speaking with Ryan Gottfredson, a professor and consultant who's focused on enhancing the internal operating systems of leaders. He's also a sought-after speaker and the author of two influential books, Success Mindsets and The Elevated Leader. Ryan's work centers on what he calls vertical development, an approach to personal and professional growth that goes much deeper than just learning new skills and acquiring knowledge. In this episode today, Ryan and I discuss the three stages of vertical development, from focusing on safety and comfort to advancement and standing out to long-term success and contributing to the greater good. The importance of being versus doing in professional development, why courage is such a critical ingredient in personal and professional growth, and how to rewire your brain away from self-protection and toward value creation. Ryan also shares the power of mindsets and how shifting our internal frameworks can lead to greater resilience, innovation, and impact. You'll also get practical tips on how to get started in your own transformation. So without further ado, let's dive into this conversation with Ryan Gottfredson. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us on The Conscious Entrepreneur.
Oh man, it's so great to be here. I would say I love your podcast and I love the purpose of the podcast. I think as somebody who I'm a professor, we'll probably get into details. I'm a professor who has become an entrepreneur, and I have found the entrepreneurship journey to be so incredibly growth promoting if we allow it to be. So I'm just excited to dive into this.
Awesome. Fantastic. Yes, growth is certainly the word of the day around here, and for this episode in particular. So you're a professor and consultant in leadership development. You've written a couple of books. Before we get into the content of those books around elevated leadership and success mindset, Ryan, what was it that turned this into an area of focus and passion for you? How did you get started?
Man, so I'm going to take you back in time. I'm going to take you back to my senior year of high school. I took a class that I don't think is offered in very many high schools, and the class was sports psychology. Okay. And I ate it up. And I remember thinking as a senior in high school, man, if I could do this type of stuff for a career, that's what I want to do. And I didn't know that there was a field in which you could study this, in which you can do this. But I've always been passionate about developing myself and wanting to develop others. Fast forward a few years later, I meet a Harvard Business School professor, and I ask him, "What do you teach?" And he says, "Organizational behavior." And I said, "What's that?" And he essentially says, "Sports psychology, but for business." I was like, "Oh, that's what I want to do." So I went and got a Ph.D. in organizational behavior and human resources at Indiana University. Did my dissertation on leadership. And one of the things that I learned about that is that the vast majority of all leadership research primarily focuses on answering one primary question. And that question is, what do leaders need to do to be effective? And I think it's a good question. It's led to some good answers, but I don't think it's a great question, because it's my belief that leadership is not about doing certain things. It's about being a certain type of person. So for the last 10 plus years, my focus in my research and in my consulting has been about how do we help people and leaders and entrepreneurs to become better by focusing on their being, not just here's the things that you need to know or here's the things that you need to do.
That's a great distinction, and one that I've made before around, are we all human beings or are we human doings? Because we spend so much time monkey mind, just running around trying to do the latest, whatever best practices or whatever thing someone's telling us to do, and like full of activity, versus who are we? And I'll just share that when we did the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit in last year in 2023, we had so it's a 2-day event. And the theme for day one, it was, who am I? And the theme for day 2 was, who am I becoming? And so this was about the change that happens on the inside, which is, as you're pointing out, not related at all to what am I doing? It's much more, who am I being? So as you look at how do I become better? How do I become a better leader? what have you learned that are the critical mindsets or the shifts that have to take place in order to change the trajectory that I'm on?
Yes. So let me we'll get into mindsets. Let me set the stage a little bit for some of that. So one of the things that I've learned that has been so incredibly helpful is that there's really two different paths to developing ourselves. One of these paths is the path that most people take, and it is the path that is only incrementally helpful at best. And there's another path that very few people take, but it is transformational if we could take that path. And I've kind of learned this from my own experiences. So the path that most people take is what I call trying to improve our doing side. And this is what is actually called horizontal development. We try to gain new knowledge and new skills. It's kind of like adding an app onto our iPad, right? That's great, because when I add an app onto my iPad, that broadens my functionality. But it doesn't necessarily improve my ability and my capacity to navigate stress, pressure, complexity, ambiguity in an effective way. And so for most of my adult life, how I tried to become better was to try to download different apps. Like, I want to get a different degree. I want to get this certificate. And what I came to understand is that while I feel like it helped me improve, I actually didn't become really any better of a person, any better of a leader. And so that's the general path. And I think we're used to this path. You think about our education system, our athletic programs, our organizational development efforts is almost all focused on horizontal development, on improving our doings. Does that make sense before I step over to the other path?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's what we're conditioned to do, right? As far as I think of it, we're conditioned to fill the gap. Hey, I don't know about this subject. I don't know anything about accounting, so I'm going to go learn about accounting. I don't know anything about sales. I'm going to go learn how to do that. And that's essentially adding to the library of knowledge, but it's not really changing who I am as a person. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, for sure, right? Because let's put this in some of the vernacular of an entrepreneur, at least the part of my experience. I mean, part of my experience as an entrepreneur is there's different things that I've had to learn how to do that I didn't know before. Like, I had to learn about social media. I had to learn about marketing. I had to learn the variety of different tools. And even as I look at my office, different tools is set up to be able to better connect with my clients. And those are great. These are all things that have helped me perform as an entrepreneur. But learning those types of things hasn't helped me elevate how I strategize about the growth of my business and how to best add value to my customers and my clients. And if I want that, I need to not look at my doing side. I need to look at my being side. And that's this other path of development. It's one that's very rare for people to take, but as I mentioned, is transformational. And this path is what we call vertical development. Vertical development isn't adding apps to our iPad. It's upgrading our internal operating system, so that we think and we strategize at a higher level than what we currently do. And one of the things that I've learned about the vertical development path is that if we want to elevate along this path, we've got to start digging inward. In fact, the deeper we go inward, the higher we could go in terms of our vertical altitude. And so you reference how I've written a couple of books. Both of the books that I've written, The Elevated Leader and Success Mindsets, present two different frameworks in which we can kind of think through where we are on this path and how do we accelerate on this path. And I'll kind of let you guide us on how you want to get into some of these ideas.
Well, first, as a general comment, the alignment between your work and what we talk about at Conscious Entrepreneur is very high, right? Because
Right.
we say the inner game of entrepreneurship is an infinite game, meaning you just keep playing it over and over and over. And in my experience, the more that I work on myself, the more I want to continue to do that, the more challenging it gets and the more rewarding it gets. And I'll also share that not everybody feels this way. So sometimes I talk to people about conscious entrepreneur and they're like, no, not interested. I don't want to do this. It's not my thing. And I wonder if, and so I wonder how you would react to that when, people say, I want to improve my performance. And maybe this is why so many people go down the route of horizontal development is they just say, oh, I want to improve my performance. So I'm just going to go on I'm going to go on a communications class. I'm going to go on a delegations course or something like that, as opposed to really doing the work. To me, when I say that and when I think about this, the word that comes up for me all the time, Ryan, is courage.
Oh, yes.
Do I have the courage, or does someone have the courage to look inside? And when you look inside, you don't know quite what you're going to find. First of all, a lot of people are uncomfortable doing that. It puts us outside of our comfort zones, but that's really where the rewards are. So riff on that for a sec, if you will.
Yeah, let's dive into that. I love that word courage. And I'll give you a framework that helps us to see where courage falls into this. Because you're right. Not everybody is wanting to go inward. Not everybody is wanting to be conscious. And in fact, let me I'll walk you through a framework and I'll give you some statistics that I think our listeners will find really interesting. So there's a model and a theory of adult development. So in the field of developmental psychology, most developmental psychologists have studied child development. We know that there's different childhood stages, 5 or more that they go through in about 20 years. Well, most developmental psychologists have focused on this child development. But there's been a select few developmental psychologists that have focused on adult development. And what they found is fascinating. So one of the things that they used to assume was that adults don't develop. Now what we've learned is that yes, adults can develop. And in fact, there's 3 primary adult development stages. But what's super fascinating about their research is that they found that while their adults can develop and there are different developmental stages, most adults never develop in adulthood vertically.
Okay,
In fact,
even though
statistics are,
so even though there is a way to develop, so there is a framework for this and it's understood, most people don't do it.
Most people don't. And I think part of the reason why is because they don't know about the framework. But the other part is connected back to courage. They don't have the courage to develop because that's what it takes. Because at these 3 levels, if we've got these 3 levels, our bodies, what they've learned is that our bodies are wired to fulfill different needs at these different levels. So to go from one level to the next, we actually have to let go of certain needs and grab hold of different needs. Let me give you an example of this. So, and even before I do that, let me give you the base percentages. So if we got 3 levels, what they found across all adults, I'll give you different percentages for leaders here in just a little bit. But for all adults, 64% are at that first level. 35% get to the second level, and only 1% gets to that top level. And so this is, to your point, is I would say 64% of people at least aren't necessarily interested in kind of diving inward into this idea of consciousness or becoming more conscious. So at that first level, as I mentioned, at each of these levels, our bodies are wired to fulfill different needs. At the first level, our bodies are wired for safety, comfort, and belonging. We want to oftentimes what this means is we want to join groups that will help us to feel safe, comfortable, and like we belong. In fact, at this level, we really don't want to take any charge. We just kind of say, hey, leader of this group, that could be my employer, it could be a religious group, whatever it might be. We kind of join the group and we say, hey, you just tell me what to do and I'll do it, provided you keep me safe, comfortable, and feeling like I belong. So it doesn't mean we're a bad person if we're there, whether we're there now or not. We've all been here at this first level.
And to go back to your data, basically 2/3 of people are in that bucket right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
2/3 of adults. Yep. And then the second level, we're going to see a dramatic shift in our needs. Here, our needs are to stand out, advance, and get ahead. And in fact, we're now willing to be unsafe, uncomfortable, and not belong in order to stand out, advance, and get ahead. So only 35% of people get here. And there's a shift here from being a dependent thinker to now being an independent thinker. Now, this second level is where we find most entrepreneurs and business leaders. In fact, the statistics are across business leaders, 7% operate at the first level, 85% operate at that second level, and 8% operate at the top level. And I think that, my perception in working with entrepreneurs and even my own experience is that you really have to be at this second level to be an entrepreneur, because becoming an entrepreneur means that you are unsafe, uncomfortable, and you're not belonging.
Right.
And that's so hopefully we could start to feel into this, is that's where courage comes in. I have the courage to do something that feels unsafe, uncomfortable, and where I may not belong, and I'm doing it for another reason. And it takes courage to make that leap. Courage
Absolutely.
shouldn't stop there, as there's a third level, but that's
okay. So one of the needs there is the need to stand out, is what you were saying. So meaning I'm getting recognition, I'm getting rewards, I'm getting accolades, I'm getting paid well, what have you. So those are the motivations for people who are at that stage.
Yeah, and let me give you a personal example. So for me, I made that shift from Mind 1.0 to Mind 2.0. And when I made kind of that first level to second level, as I made that shift, that's when I was like, oh, I want to start a business. And oh, I want to write a book. And so I wrote my first book, Success Mindsets. And one of the things that I did in promoting that book is I did an ebook marketing campaign. So this is the inner workings of authorship that I don't love, but it's part of the game. And I did an ebook marketing campaign that I spent tens of thousands of dollars to hit the Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller lists. Right? Why would I do that? Well, it's because I wanted to stand out, advance, and get ahead. Now, I think I had some good motives for that, but I also had some self-serving motives, right? At the same time. And that's part of being at that second level, is we've kind of got this mixed motives between, serving others and also us standing out and getting ahead.
Got it. Okay. So that's what you're calling Mind 2.0.
Yep. Mind 2.0. Okay. So I'll talk about these three levels. I usually use the terms Mind 1.0, 2.0, and Mind 3.0, because there's kind of an upgrade of our internal operating system at each level. So that's level 2, the Mind 2.0. The next level up, again, we're going to see a significant shift in our needs. So in Mind 1.0, we want to stand in. At Mind 2.0, we want to stand out. At Mind 3.0, we don't care about standing in or standing out. What we care about is contributing, adding value, and lifting others. When we're here, we move from being a dependent to independent to interdependent thinker. And we become much more focused on a purpose of something, creating value for something bigger than ourselves. And when people can get at this level, this is where magic happens, right? You could think about, I'll throw out some stereotypical companies and really great leaders. You look at Satya Nadella at Microsoft and the impact that he's had there. You look at Ed Catmull. I don't know if anybody's read the book Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, but you look at the impact he had at Pixar Animation and then at Disney Animation. You look at Alan Mulally and the impact that he had at Ford. Indra Nooyi and the impact that she had at PepsiCo. Mary Barra at GM. So these are some examples of some leaders that seem to be operating at this Mind 3.0 level. And when they're there, they think, process, and operate in a manner that allows for greater growth of the business and a greater impact that they have on the world as compared to leaders who operate at the Mind 2.0 or the Mind 1.0 level.
Okay. How can we tell that that's the case? So you talk about these esteemed leaders here. How do we know that this is how they're behaving? What are we looking for in their language, in their behavior, in how they're conducting business?
Yeah, let me give you an example. So I started working with an organization, and I met the COO, and I asked her, "How do you measure success in your business?" And her answer was really quick. It was almost like she had it memorized, and she said, "Double-digit growth year over year." And in my mind, I'm thinking, no, like that's just is screaming the second level, that mind 2.0 that's focused on standing out, advancing, and getting ahead, because they're oftentimes focused on results or outcomes.
Okay.
Now, what's interesting about this business is that this business operates in the healthcare space, right? I think a leader at that third level, the mind 3.0, they would have answered that question. How do you measure success in your business? By the impact that they're having on patients, right? That's connected to a purpose that's bigger than themselves. So to me, that's one of the biggest hallmark differences between Mind 2.0 leaders, which is most leaders, and Mind 3.0 leaders. Mind 2.0 leaders are focused on short-term results and outcomes. Mind 3.0 leaders are focused on a purpose and focused on creating an environment that best allows their people to contribute to that purpose. So they're intensely focused on culture, right? Satya Nadella, for example, in his book Hit Refresh, he says the C in CEO stands for curator of culture. That's my number one responsibility.
Okay. Part of me wonders, when you gave that example about the COO saying that she was wanting double-digit growth year over year, makes me think about the differences in personality types of someone who is a COO, maybe more operations focused than the CEO, who typically, and I mean, these are very stereotypical observations here, but that CEO may be more of a visionary than the COO, who might be more operational. I presume in your research you have also found that the people who are the CEO tend to exhibit more of those visionary behaviors and therefore be closer to Mind 3.0 as opposed to people who are more operational roles, or am I just totally full of it?
I would say I wish I saw that, and I don't. Let me give you another example. So one of the things that I've just been super fortunate to get to know Alan Mulally, the former CEO at Ford, and he was head of commercial airlines at Boeing before he became CEO at Ford. And Boeing used to be a rather well-respected company. He kind of saw the changes were being made, and the changes that were being made at Boeing before he left was Boeing was hiring a bunch of ex-GE executives. So Jack Welch should kind of step down, and Jack Welch was a Mind 2.0 leader. He was focused on the short-term results and the outcomes. Now, he was great at it. They hit shareholder expectations year over year, but it left the company ultimately in a place of disarray, and now they're effectively defunct. And so Boeing is bringing in all of these GE executives, and they start to lead Boeing through that Mind 2.0 mentality. And we can see now the byproduct of that. All of the issues Boeing is now having with their quality, panels flying off airlines, etc. And the reality is that a Mind 3.0 leader could show up anywhere in an organization. They don't have to be the CEO. But what I am finding is I'm not finding CEOs to be any more likely to be in Mind 3.0 than a COO or a CFO or, fill in the C, whatever that might be. I typically find that almost all executives are in that Mind 2.0.
Okay. Well, I can certainly vouch for and root for the Conscious Entrepreneur podcast audience as being very highly represented in the Mind 3.0 group.
Well,
At least
you would think so,
hope.
right? Because it's really Mind 3.0 people that care about concepts related to consciousness, right? Because they see that as being an ultimate driver of creating value for others. Leaders at Mind 2.0, why would I care about consciousness when I could care about, revenues, profits, advertising, marketing, whatever that might be? Because the most vertically developed people, they care more about ideas related to consciousness than people at the lower levels.
So Ryan, what's the progression here? Do I just wake up one day and will myself from one model into another, or how does one approach this? Is it conscious? Is it unconscious? How have you found that process to unfold?
Yeah, and it is a transformational process if we could step on the path to do so. So I think that path always starts with awareness. We've got to become more aware about our internal operating system and how it works. I do have, if it's okay, I have a couple of assessments on my website that people can take. They're free. You could go to ryangottfredson.com. There's a vertical development assessment to help you identify which of these three mind levels do you spend the most percentage of your time. And then there's another assessment that dives into mindsets, specifically 4 different sets of mindsets. And both of these are tools that can be used to awaken to the quality of our internal operating system and how we're wired. So that's the first step, is the awakening journey. Then beyond that, once we awaken, then it's okay, what do I do, or what do I need to focus on? And I do think that there are, I'm going to call it starter level activities, deeper level activities, and then really deep activities. And it's probably worth commenting on each of those. Does that sound okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Okay, so I'm curious, Alex. Have you ever read the book "Can't Hurt Me" by David Goggins?
I have, yes.
Okay, it's a remarkable book. He has such an incredible story. I would say he comes across as being rather Mind 2.0 throughout the book. But what I do love about the story is his transition from Mind 1.0 to Mind 2.0. It's incredibly dramatic. And he really is an incredible person, has done some incredible things. I don't agree 100% with his mentality and philosophies, but I love the book. And the reason why I bring him up as an example is because just on his own, he did many starter level things to get from Mind 1.0 to Mind 2.0. So some of the things that he did was every day as he was shaving in the mirror, he would like have a self check-in. He's literally checking in and talking to himself in the mirror. He's doing affirmational statements. He's putting sticky notes up about his goals, what he wants to obtain. These are all daily reminders to help him get out of safety, comfort, and belonging mode and into stand out, advance, and get ahead. Now, what is incredible about his transition is he went from a washout of the Air Force who was a 300-pound night exterminator, and in the course of 6 months, he got himself into shape and ready to become a Navy SEAL, right? And it's just, and that he credits that idea of just doing this intense working on himself. It's the small little things every day, affirmational statements, checking in at the mirror, being honest with himself, right? These are the types of kind of starter activities that we could do. Let me give you another example. Alex, have you ever heard of this book, The 5-Minute Journal?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So this has been a game changer for me. In fact, when I first became an entrepreneur, I met a CEO here in Orange County, California, and very outgoing, bubbly guy, charismatic guy. And he handed me this book, The 5-Minute Journal. And he says, this book will change your life. And outwardly, I'm very gracious, like, oh, I love books. This is awesome. Thank you so much. But inwardly, I'm thinking, who the hell do you think I am? There is no way that I'm going to journal. Like, that was what I was thinking. So I literally came home. I came into my office. I've got a trash can right next to me. And I went to throw this book away. And then as I went to do so, I had this like epiphany. And you've seen like in these cartoons, like in my mind's eye over my shoulder is this guy. His name's Charles Antis. He kind of appeared there, and I heard him say, this book will change your life. And I was like, mid throwing it away, I was like, oh, maybe I should give this a chance.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. Is I said, I'll do 2 weeks. And if I feel like this makes a difference in my life, I'll keep doing it. If not, it's going in the trash. So I'm still doing this every day. This is over 7 years later. And every day, the first thing I do is I write down 3 things I'm grateful for, 3 things that would make today great, and then some self-affirmations, right? These are just examples, some of the starter level activities that research has proven upgrades our internal operating system. So those are some starter level ideas. I don't know. Anything to add there, Alex?
One of the things that sometimes people think about the conscious crowd is that we're trying to impose some sort of mindset on people. Oh, I know how to do this. I'm enlightened. I know the right way. I can solve all your problems, etc. And that can obviously create a lot of resistance, very understandably. And so what I'm curious about is, not necessarily like how do we make people do the things that we know are good for them, but rather what are the things that are going to be indicators for someone on where they might find themselves? And you said that you had an assessment, but importantly, and I appreciate you talking about these starter routes, is, if I am at a place where I think, hey, what would it look like to be better in this area? What would it look like to feel a certain way? How do I start to take those first steps? Because it can also be true that it's that there are people who are wanting this, who are interested in this, who want to make some type of commitment to themselves, and they just don't know how to do it, right? And maybe they say, I don't want to go too far off the beaten path here. I just want to understand, what's a reasonable step to take. And so, you're saying things like, in David Goggins' case, affirmations, goal setting, clarity on what you want, finding support systems. With the journal, it's, again, sort of visioning and gratitude and giving yourself support. So sounds like those are really great ways to start the journey for people.
Yeah. And let me add in a couple. I'm going to add another author that is really great at communicating some of these starter level activities. And her name is Jen Sincero, and she's written several books. One book is You're a Badass, and another book I would recommend is You're a Badass at Making Money. Okay. And both of those books, I think, are really great, feature really great kind of starter level activities. So those are some starter activities. Let me take us down to kind of the next level deeper. And this is where I primarily focus in the work that I do with leaders and organizations. And that is to focus on our mindsets. Our mindsets are the most foundational aspect of everything that we do. How we see our world shapes how we think, how we learn, and how we behave. And we all have mindsets, and they are all driving our non-conscious thoughts and processes. Most people think that they have good mindsets, but most people actually don't even know the quality of their mindsets. And what I found through my research, and this isn't all my ideas, but I found that there's 4 different sets of mindsets that range. Each of these are a set, represent a continuum. They range from being wired for self-protection to being wired for value creation. And if we have, for example, a mindset that is wired for value creation, we probably feel like that's the right mindset because it's protecting us in some way. But while it might be protecting us, it's probably holding us back from creating value. So let me give you an example of this. In fact, I'll walk you through the framework at a really high level. So Alex, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I'm going to give you 4 desires, and I want you to tell me whether or not you think society says these are good or bad desires. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So the desires are the desire to look good, be right, avoid problems, and get ahead.
I would say that generally society looks at all of those positively.
Right? Because they're justifiable. Who wants to look bad, be wrong, have problems, and get passed up?
Right.
Nobody. But if we have these desires to look good, be right, avoid problems, and get ahead, where is our focus? It's on ourselves. When we have these desires, our internal wiring is focused on ourselves. And so when we have these desires, which are associated with different self-protective mindsets, which are in order, fixed, closed, prevention, and inward mindsets. And so when we have these mindsets and their associated desires, we operate more in self-protection mode. And if we're there, it feels good to us. There's a reason why we have these mindsets. is it's because they're protecting us from looking bad, being wrong, having problems, and getting passed up. So I'm just trying to step into the idea that we may have self-protective mindsets. We may actually feel like they're the right mindsets to have, but we may not be aware that if we have those mindsets, they're actually probably causing us more harm than help. So that's mindsets that are on the self-protective side. Let me talk about the mindsets that are on the value creating side. So the mindsets here are growth, open, promotion, and outward. And the desires connected with these, it's not the desire to look good, it's the desire to learn and grow. It's not the desire to be right, it's the desire to find truth and think optimally. It's not the desire to avoid problems, it's the desire to fulfill a purpose. And it's not the desire to get ahead, it's the desire to lift others. And these desires are easier said than done, right? Because if, for example, if I want to learn and grow, that means I have to be okay looking bad at times. If I want to find truth and think optimally, I'm going to have to admit that I'm wrong at times. If I want to fulfill a purpose, I'm going to have to wade through problems at times. And if I want to lift others, I'm going to have to put myself on the back burner at times. And I don't know about you, Alex, but those at times moments are really tricky to navigate. Mm-hmm. And our mindsets are what dictates, do we move toward, in those moments, do we move towards self-protection or do we move towards value creation? How is our body wired? And so when I work with leaders, this is what I'm doing, is I'm helping them to awaken to the wiring of their minds and their bodies and which way they lean in those tricky moments. What mindsets do they have? And then how do we go about shifting those mindsets?
So what does value creation mean in this context? It's often used in the business context, but what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it is. It's mapping on to that mind 3.0 mentality, where I am wired to contribute, add value, and lift others. Where I am all about creating value for something bigger than myself. Whereas the more self-protective mindsets in the mind 2.0 and mind 1.0 are ultimately focused on me. Either my safety, comfort, and belonging, or me standing out, advancing, or getting ahead.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. And so I score myself on these 4 components: fixed mindset versus growth, closed versus open, prevention versus promotion, and inward outward. So I take the assessment, I score myself on those, and then immediately I think, oh, damn, I should be higher on this one, or whatever. So immediately people take this and they're like, I need to change something. I need to do something differently, right? But I suspect that's not what you're going for.
Well, there can be some things, right? That's where we could bring in some of those starter activities that actually can really help. If we could focus those starter activities and make them in alignment with the mindset set that we want to work on, that's going to be really helpful. But if we wanted to do some deeper work, what we would need to unpack, and this is where we come back to something that we talked about earlier. The deeper we go inward, the higher we can go in terms of our vertical altitude. We need to come to understand why we have some wiring for self-protection, right? So this is oftentimes where I serve as a coach or a guide to the leaders and entrepreneurs that I work with to help them surface and understand where their self-protective wiring comes from. Because it comes from something. Let me give you an example. I was working with an entrepreneur. He's been able to scale his business where now they've got 1,000 employees. But he was the one who founded the business. And I asked him, why did you start this business? And I found his answer to be revealing. He said, to prove others wrong. And I was, that feels like more Mind 2.0, because it's not about creating value for others. It's actually about proving others wrong. And one of the things that I've learned about as I worked with him about his leadership style is he kind of had to have his hands in everything, right? Because his body told him, if things don't go perfectly, I won't be able to prove others wrong. And this is this internal wiring that caused him to have more self-protective mindsets and to stay at that mind 2.0 level.
And so prove others wrong here. When he says, I want to prove others wrong, this is because people think that he couldn't do it, that he couldn't create a company, scale a company, be a success. Is that the driving motivation?
Yeah, it was. He had felt shunned by his past employer, and he's like, I think I could do this better than you, so I'm going to go do it. Yeah. So, and here's the reality: is there was some trauma involved in what he had been through prior to him leaving his prior company and him starting up his business. And this is where we get into the deepest levels. Is if we want to do really deep work on ourselves, we've got to acknowledge the role of things like trauma and neurological conditions that may be impacting our body's internal operating system. So, for example, what we've learned about trauma is the more trauma one has experienced in their life, the more self-protective their body becomes wired to operate. I mean, that kind of makes sense. So and the reason why I love bringing this up is because it suggests that if I want to elevate or vertically develop, I ultimately and foundationally need to heal my mind, body, and heart. So that's a part. So doing kind of healing trauma work is a really deep level of vertical development. Another thing to consider, and this is something that I'm doing some research on now, is I'm looking at the role that ADHD plays in how our internal operating system functions. Okay. And what I'm finding is that one is interesting, is a lot of entrepreneurs have ADHD.
Yes.
And I'm also finding that ADHD is disruptive to our body's internal operating system and that it keeps us at lower levels. And so one of the things that I've actually done for myself is, and there's different ways to kind of work, I'm going to say treat or rise above ADHD, is one of the things I've done is neurofeedback therapy. And I've actually found that to be incredibly helpful in my kind of the process of me improving as it relates to ADHD. And we could dive into some of the neuroscience behind it if we have time. If not, that might be enough.
Just give us the quick 30 seconds on neurofeedback.
Yeah. So ADHD, there's 3 brain regions that are responsible for our processing. It's our salience network, our default mode network, and our central executive network. And when people have ADHD, the ties and connections between these 3 brain networks are weak. And what neurofeedback therapy does, and there's a couple different forms of it, but it's essentially using EEGs and really light electrical stimulus to strengthen those connections between the brain networks.
Okay, got it. And so this is a device it's a device you're wearing, or you're going.
Yeah, you usually need to have a neurofeedback therapist to kind of, you're having to go into a therapist to receive these types of treatments. I think in the near future, I think we'll see individuals or people, technology where people could do it on their own. But to my knowledge, you have to go see a therapist.
So let's go back to this concept here and dig in a little bit as we wrap up. You're saying that as I'm going through and understanding my mindsets and where I am today, if I have this self-protective element, then I may want to be looking at, why do I have that? And one of the reasons that I might have that could be there's some sort of trauma or event or traumas that exist in my life, which have caused me to essentially close my body, close my mind. And that's preventing me from getting where I want in my career, having the impact that I'd like to have, being a change agent in the world, or all the things that I want to be doing, be it even at Mind 2.0, let alone Mind 3.0. And investigating that will then unlock for me areas of growth and new ways of being. Did I get that right?
Yeah, and let me share just a little bit about my journey. So when I first learned about mindsets, that was very transformational and helping me to move from Mind 1.0 to Mind 2.0. And I would say my primary focus was on just improving my mindsets directly. And if people were to take my mindset assessment, they'll get some guidance on how to do that. But my focus was on, hey, here's some tools, resources, activities that I could do to improve my mindsets. And that was my primary focus for about 4 years. And honestly, I remember at the end of those 4 years thinking, man, I feel like I have grown more in the last 4 years than the 15 years prior to that. And I was feeling like quite accomplished about that. And then I started to do the deeper work. I started to work with a trauma therapist, and I started to work with a therapist who specialized in neurofeedback therapy. And I've done that for the last 2 to 3 years. And I can now say I feel like I've grown more in the last 2 to 3 years than I have all of the other years. And so I do think we can make really big progress just by focusing on that mindset level. But if we really want to accelerate our development, we do actually need to get deeper into that trauma and actually kind of that neuroscience level of things. I do want to just come back to the word that you used before that resonated with me, which is courageous, or having courage, because I think everything that we've talked about is actually directions for how we elevate in our courage. And the more courage we can develop within ourselves, the greater the impact that we're going to have. And the more we're going to be able to grow our business to impact the world around us. So hopefully listeners resonate with that idea. And if I could be of any further support to you, Alex, or to any of the listeners, so would love to do so.
Okay, fantastic. Well, hey, Ryan, this has been a very helpful conversation for us to unlock some of these success mindsets and get a sense for how we're growing. And are we just growing by learning new things and putting more apps on the iPad, as you said, or are we growing by becoming a different person, becoming a different version of who we are, which is what vertical growth is all about. Really appreciate you sharing this and coming on to be an expert in this area for the Conscious Entrepreneur audience. Great to have you.
Thanks, Alex.